The letter arrived at Ashworth Hall on a Tuesday morning, and by Wednesday, the whole county knew the Duke of Ashworth had refused to marry Miss Eleanor Whitby. But nobody knew what he said to her face. He said it in the library, with the doors open, so the servants would hear. He wanted them to hear. "Marry my brother instead." Eleanor stood very still. Her gloved hands stayed folded in front of her dress. The clock on the mantel ticked 4 times before she spoke. "Is that an offer, Your Grace, or an insult?" The Duke, Julian Ashworth, turned to the window. 34 years old, tall, a jaw that looked carved from the same stone as the house. He did not look at her when he answered. "It is a solution. My father signed a contract with your father 12 years ago. A Whitby daughter marries into Ashworth. The contract does not say which Ashworth. And your brother agrees to this. My brother does what I tell him." Eleanor walked to the window and stood beside him, close enough that he had to see her reflection in the glass. Her voice came out quiet and level. "Then I accept." Julian's head turned, fast. His eyes searched her face for the trick, the tears, the game. There was nothing there. Just calm gray eyes looking back at him. "You accept," he repeated. "I accept your brother, Lord Edmund. You may arrange it for whenever suits the family." She stepped back and gave a small, correct curtsy. "Thank you for your honesty, Your Grace. It is rare in men of your position." She walked out of the library with her spine straight. Her footsteps did not hurry. Julian stood at the window for a long time after the door closed. His hand rested on the sill. Slowly, his fingers curled against the wood. If you have ever watched someone realize a mistake, the exact moment it becomes too late to fix, stay with this story, because that is precisely what happened to the Duke of Ashworth. Downstairs, in the servants' corridor, the housekeeper, Mrs. Pemberton, pressed a hand to her chest. The footman beside her whispered, "Did she truly say yes?" "She did," Mrs. Pemberton said. "God help this house." Lord Edmund Ashworth was 28, and everything his brother was not. Where Julian was granite, Edmund was warm bread. He laughed too loud at dinner. He remembered the gardeners' names. He had once carried a stable boy with a broken leg 2 miles on his own back. When Julian told him about the arrangement, Edmund set down his glass of brandy and stared. "You gave her away, to me, like a horse you didn't want. The contract required a marriage. There will be a marriage." "And what did she say?" Julian paused, only for a second. "She agreed." Edmund stood up. He walked a slow circle around the study, rubbing the back of his neck. Then he stopped and looked at his brother with an expression Julian had never seen on him before, something hard underneath the softness. "You are a fool, Julian. You are the biggest fool in England, and one day you will know it. Careful, brother." "No." Edmund picked up his coat. "I will marry her. I will marry her, and I will be kind to her, every single day, and you will watch it happen from across the dinner table for the rest of your life." He left the door open behind him. The engagement was announced within the week. And here is where the story turns. Because Eleanor Whitby did not sit in her room and weep. She arrived at Ashworth Hall every afternoon, as was proper for a bride-to-be learning the household. But she did not come quietly. She came alive. She walked the gardens with Edmund and laughed at his terrible jokes, loud enough for the sound to carry through the open windows of Julian's study. She learned every servant's name in 4 days. When the cook's daughter fell sick with fever, Eleanor sent her own physician from town and paid the bill herself, without telling anyone. Mrs. Pemberton found out anyway. By nightfall, the whole staff knew. Julian watched all of it. He watched from windows, from doorways, from the head of the dinner table, where Eleanor sat beside Edmund, and never once looked in Julian's direction, unless spoken to. And when she did answer him, her manners were perfect. Cool. Correct. The exact politeness a person gives to a stranger on a train. That was the part that got under his skin. Not anger, not hurt. She gave him nothing at all. One evening, he found her alone in the music room. She was playing the piano, something slow and old, and the last light of the day came orange through the tall windows and caught the side of her face. He stood in the doorway. She kept playing. "You play well," he said. "My mother taught me, before she died." Her fingers did not stop moving. "Is there something you need, Your Grace? This is my house. I do not need a reason to enter a room." "Of course." She finished the piece, closed the lid softly, stood, gathered her shawl, and gave him that same small curtsy. "Good evening." She had to pass close to him to reach the door. As she did, he caught the smell of lavender, and his hand moved, almost, toward her arm. It stopped halfway. She never saw it. She was already gone, and Julian stood alone in the music room with the orange light dying on the floorboards. That night, he did not sleep. He sat in his study with the fire burned down to red coals, and he asked himself the question he had been drowning for a week. Why did he refuse her in the first place? The truth was ugly, and it sat in his chest like a swallowed stone. He refused her because she frightened him, because at their very first meeting, months ago, she had corrected him about a line of Latin poetry in front of 3 other gentlemen, and she had been right, and she had smiled at him afterward, without a drop of apology. Because his father's marriage had been a slow, cold war of 30 years, and Julian had promised himself he would marry someone simple, someone manageable, someone who could never reach inside him and take hold of anything. Eleanor Whitby could reach everything. He had known it in one evening. So he had pushed her at his brother. The way a man throws water away from a fire, he refuses to admit is burning. The wedding was set for the first Saturday of June. 3 weeks away. 2 weeks away. Then, on a gray Thursday, everything cracked open. Julian was riding the East Fields when he saw them by the old stone bridge. Edmund and Eleanor, standing close. Edmund was holding both of her hands in his, and his head was bent toward hers, and he was speaking with an urgency Julian could read from 100 yards. Julian pulled his horse to a stop behind the tree line. His breath went shallow. He could not hear the words. He could only watch Eleanor slowly shake her head, and watch Edmund press her hands tighter. And then, Eleanor looked up toward the trees, directly at him. She could not have seen him. The shadows were too deep, but for 3 full seconds, she stared at that exact spot, and Julian sat frozen in his saddle, like a poacher caught on his own land. Then she turned back to Edmund, said something short, and walked away across the bridge alone. Edmund stood there watching her go. Then he drove his boot into the mud, hard, and shouted a single word at the river that no gentleman uses in company. That night at dinner, nobody spoke. Edmund drank too much wine and stared at his plate. Eleanor cut her food into small, precise pieces and ate almost none of it. Julian watched them both from the head of the table, and the silver clinked, and the candles hissed, and the air in the room felt like the minute before a summer storm. At last, Edmund pushed back his chair. The legs screeched against the floor. "I need to speak with you, Julian. Tonight, in the study." Eleanor's fork went still above her plate. "Edmund," she said quietly. One word, a warning inside it. "No, Eleanor." Edmund's voice shook. "He deserves to hear it. He has always deserved to hear it. And I am done carrying it." He walked out. Julian rose slowly, his eyes on Eleanor. Her face had gone pale, but her chin stayed high. Her hand, though, the hand resting on the white tablecloth, was trembling. "What does he mean to tell me?" Julian asked her. Eleanor looked at him for the first time in 2 weeks, truly looked, and in her gray eyes there was something enormous and buried, something she had been holding down since the day in the library. "The truth, Your Grace," she said, "and when you hear it, you will wish with everything in you that you had never opened that door." Julian walked to the study. The corridor had never felt so long. Behind the heavy oak door, he could hear his brother pouring a drink, glass rattling against glass. He put his hand on the door handle and pushed it open. The study smelled of brandy and cold ash. Edmund stood by the fireplace with a glass in his hand, already half empty. He did not turn when Julian entered. He spoke to the fire instead. "Close the door." Julian closed it. The latch clicked in the silence like a bone snapping. "Sit down, brother." "I will stand." Edmund laughed, but there was no joy in it. It came out of him rough and tired, like a cough. He drained his glass, set it on the mantel, and finally turned around. His eyes were red, not from the wine. 12 years ago, Edmund said. "Do you remember the winter? Father took us to Whitby Manor." "The winter he signed the contract?" "I remember. You were 22. You spent the whole visit in the library with Father and old Mr. Whitby, talking about land and money and signatures." Edmund walked slowly across the room. "I was 16. And there was a girl there, 14 years old, all elbows and questions, following the grooms around the stable, because she loved the horses more than the drawing room." Julian's jaw tightened. "Eleanor." "Eleanor," Edmund nodded. "She got locked out in the snow one evening. Some cousin's cruel joke. Latched the garden door behind her and left her in the dark in a muslin dress. Do you know who found her?" Julian said nothing. "Nobody found her." Edmund's voice dropped. "She walked 2 miles around the entire wall of the estate, in the snow, in the dark, at 14, and she came in through the kitchen with blue lips, and she did not cry, not one tear. The cook told me about it the next morning, and I remember thinking, even at 16, that I had never heard of anyone with a spine like that." He stopped in front of Julian. "I have loved her since I was 16 years old, Julian. 12 years, before you ever spoke a single word to her." The fire cracked. A log shifted and sent sparks up the black throat of the chimney. Julian's voice came out flat. "Then this arrangement should please you." The blow came so fast, Julian never saw it start. Edmund's fist caught him across the jaw and sent him back 2 steps into the desk. Papers slid to the floor. An inkwell rocked, tipped, and rolled off the edge, spilling a slow black stain across the carpet. Edmund stood over him, shaking, his knuckles split. "Please me." His voice broke on the words. "You gave her to me like a coat you didn't want, and you think that pleases me? You stood in that library with the doors open, in front of the servants, and you shamed her. You shamed the finest woman in England in her own hearing, and you did it on purpose, and I had to smile and play the grateful little brother, while she stood in the hallway afterward, with her hands pressed against the wall, to keep herself standing." Julian froze. She heard that? She heard everything. She was meant to meet you in the library, Julian. She was 10 feet from the door when you started talking. You wanted the servants to hear. Well, she heard first. Julian touched his jaw. His fingers came away with a smear of blood from his lip. He looked at it strangely, as if the red belonged to someone else. "Today at the bridge," he said slowly, "I saw you. You were holding her hands. I was begging her." Edmund turned away and gripped the mantel with both hands, his head hanging down between his arms. "I was begging her to marry me for real. Not for the contract, not for the families, for me. I told her everything. 12 years of it. Every word I had saved up since I was 16. The room went very quiet. "And she said no," Julian said. Edmund's shoulders dropped. When he spoke again, his voice was almost too soft to hear. "She said she would marry me. She would honor the agreement, and she would be a good and faithful wife, and she would never once give me a reason for complaint." He lifted his head. In the mirror above the mantel, his eyes found Julian's. "And then she asked me to never again ask her for her heart, because her heart was not hers to give anymore. It had been stolen," she said. 2 years ago, in one evening, by a man who quoted Latin poetry badly and could not stand to be corrected. The words landed in Julian's chest one at a time, like stones dropped down a well. 2 years ago, the dinner at Harrowfield, the Latin, her smile across the table, bright and fearless, while 3 gentlemen laughed, and Julian sat there with his ears burning, unable to look away from her. "She has loved you since that night," Edmund said. "God forgive her, she loves you still. Even now, even after the library." He turned around. His face was wet, and he did not bother to hide it. "So yes, brother, I will marry the woman I have loved for 12 years. And every day of my life I will watch her sit across from me and love you instead. That is the arrangement you built. I hope the contract was worth it." Julian could not move. His whole body had gone somewhere far away. He heard his own heartbeat in his ears, slow and enormous. He saw the library again, the open doors, her folded gloved hands, the 4 ticks of the clock before she answered him. "Is that an offer, Your Grace, or an insult?" Her voice so steady, her spine so straight. She had walked into that room expecting a proposal. She had walked out of it, destroyed, and she had not let a single crack show. Why? Julian's voice came out hoarse. Why did she accept? She could have refused the whole match. Her father would have released her. Because refusing meant scandal for both houses. It meant her younger sisters ruined by gossip before their first season. It meant your name and hers dragged through every drawing room in London. Edmund shook his head slowly. She took the wound and folded it up small and put it away where nobody could see it. Because that is what she does, Julian. That is what she has always done. She walked around the wall in the snow. She does not knock on doors that have been latched against her. Edmund picked up his coat from the chair. "The wedding is in 2 weeks. I intend to go through with it. I will not shame her twice." He paused at the door, his hand on the frame, not looking back. "You broke something that loved you, brother. And the worst part, the part I cannot forgive, is that you will spend 50 years at the same table with it, watching." The door closed behind him. Julian stood alone in the study for a long time. The ink stain spread slowly into the carpet, black and patient. The fire burned down. Somewhere in the house, a clock struck 11, then midnight, and still he stood there, with his split lip and his brother's blood-knuckled truth ringing in his skull. Then he moved. If this story has taken hold of you the way it took hold of everyone at Ashworth Hall that night, stay until the end, because what Julian did next, no one in that house saw coming. He went up the stairs 2 at a time, past the portraits of 6 generations of Ashworth dukes, all of them cold-eyed men who married well and loved nothing. He stopped outside the guest wing, where Eleanor stayed on the nights her lessons with Mrs. Pemberton ran late. There was light under her door. He raised his hand to knock and stopped. Through the heavy wood, faint, almost nothing, he heard it. A sound he had never once heard from Eleanor Whitby in all the weeks she had walked through his house, with her chin high and her manners perfect. She was crying, not loud, not the pretty weeping of drawing-room ladies. This was quiet and ragged and pressed into a pillow, the sound of someone who had held a wall up for 2 weeks and had finally, in the dark, alone, let it fall. Julian's hand hung in the air an inch from the door. His forehead came to rest against the wood. He stood like that, on the outside of a latched door, in the corridor of his own house, listening to what he had done. His breath fogged the polished oak. His hand slowly closed into a fist and pressed flat against the door, not knocking, just resting there, as if he could reach her through it. He did not knock. Some doors, once latched, are not opened by the man who latched them. They are walked around, 2 miles in the snow, if that is what it takes. Julian went back down the stairs. He walked into his study, swept the spilled papers off the desk, and sat down with a fresh sheet and a pen. The candle threw his shadow huge against the wall. He wrote one line, read it, tore the paper in half, and started again. Then again. The floor around the desk slowly filled with crushed white paper, like the first snow of that winter 12 years ago. At 4 in the morning, Mrs. Pemberton, doing her early rounds, saw the light under the study door and heard the pen still scratching. At 6, the stable master was woken by the Duke himself, fully dressed, standing in the gray dawn light with mud already on his boots. "Saddle the black," Julian said, "and send word to Whitby Manor. Tell Mr. Whitby the Duke of Ashworth is coming to see him on a matter concerning the contract." The stable master hesitated. "Shall I say what matter, your grace?" Julian swung up into the saddle. His jaw was bruised purple, where his brother had hit him, and he had not slept, and his eyes had something in them that had not been there yesterday. "Tell him," Julian said, "that I am coming to break it." He turned the horse toward the east road and kicked it into a gallop, and the sound of the hooves rolled across the wet fields like distant thunder. Behind him, in a window on the second floor of Ashworth Hall, a curtain moved. Eleanor stood at the glass in her nightdress, her eyes swollen, her hair down, watching the black horse and its rider tear across the fields toward her father's house. Her hand came up slowly and pressed against the window, and 2 floors below her, standing at his own window with a glass of morning brandy he had not touched, Edmund watched the same horse disappear over the hill. His grip tightened on the glass. His breath came out slow and shaking. Then he set the brandy down, untouched, walked to his wardrobe and began to dress. "Not this time, brother," he said quietly to the empty room. "You do not get to break her twice." He called for the second fastest horse in the stable. The east road was 7 miles of mud and hedgerow, and Julian rode it like a man being chased. The black horse's breath came in white bursts. Cold morning air cut at Julian's face and pulled water from his eyes. He did not slow at the crossroads. He did not slow at the village, where the baker's boy dropped an armful of loaves to watch a duke thunder past with no hat and a bruised face. Behind him, gaining ground with every mile, came a second rider. Edmund rode low over the neck of the gray mare, coat flying open, and by the time the chimneys of Whitby Manor rose above the trees, only 200 yards separated the brothers. Julian heard the hooves behind him. He looked back once. His heels dug in harder. They came up the gravel drive of Whitby Manor almost together, stones spraying, servants scattering from the front steps. Julian swung down before his horse had fully stopped. Edmund hit the ground 3 seconds behind him and grabbed his brother's arm and spun him around. "What are you doing, Julian? Let go of me. Answer me first." Edmund's chest heaved. His knuckles were still split from the night before. "You told the stable master you are breaking the contract. Breaking it how? By shaming her a second time? By throwing her family into scandal to ease your own guilt? Edmund, because I will not allow it. Do you hear me? I will marry her Saturday, and she will be safe and respected, and you will live with what you... I am not breaking her contract." Julian's voice cracked across the drive like a whip. Then it dropped, low and raw. "I am breaking mine." Edmund went still. "What?" "The contract binds a Whitby daughter to an Ashworth." "I told her the contract does not say which Ashworth." Julian pulled his arm free. His hands were shaking. He looked down at them as if they belonged to a stranger. "I came to ask her father to release you from it, and to write my own name where yours stands. And then I came to get on my knees, Edmund, in front of her father, in front of the servants, in front of anyone who wishes to watch. The whole county heard me shame her. The whole county can hear this too." The front door of the manor opened. Old Mr. Whitby stood at the top of the steps in his morning coat, leaning on his cane, looking down at the 2 mud-splattered sons of his oldest friend. His face gave away nothing. "Your Grace, my lord." His eyes moved from the bruise on Julian's jaw to the split skin on Edmund's hand. It appears the Ashworth brothers have already held one negotiation this morning. Sir, Julian climbed the steps. I need to speak with you, and then, if she will permit it, with your daughter. My daughter is not here. Julian stopped on the third step. What? She left Ashworth Hall at dawn. Her maid brought a note an hour ago. Mr. Whitby drew a folded paper from his coat. His hand was not quite steady. She writes that she has gone to settle the matter herself, in the only place where this whole affair began. She writes that she is done letting men decide the shape of her life in rooms she is not standing in. Julian took the note. Eleanor's handwriting, clean and straight, no wasted words. The bottom line read, I will be in the library. The paper trembled in his hand. She had gone to Ashworth Hall. She was there now, in that same room, with its open doors and its ticking clock. She had ridden back into the very place where he had cut her down, and she was standing in it, waiting, on her own terms. Julian turned. He was down the steps and back in the saddle before Mr. Whitby could speak again. Edmund caught the bridle. For a long moment the brothers looked at each other, and everything of the last 12 years passed between them without a word. The snow, the stable, the bridge, the blow in the study. Then Edmund let go of the bridle and stepped back. Ride, he said quietly, and Julian, if you wound her again, there will not be a contract in England that saves you from me. Julian rode. The 7 miles back were the longest of his life. He passed the crossroads. The village, the baker's boy, still gathering his loaves, who watched the same wild duke gallop back the other way. The whole time, one picture burned behind Julian's eyes. Eleanor at 14, locked out in the snow, walking 2 miles around a wall, in the dark, rather than beg at a latched door. She had never once knocked. Now she had walked back through his front door on her own, and she was standing in the wreckage of the library, and whatever she had come to say, she had come to say it standing up. Ashworth Hall rose out of the morning mist. Julian left the horse loose on the drive and took the front steps 2 at a time. In the great hall, the servants stood frozen in a loose half-circle, all of them pretending to work, all of them facing the same direction. The library doors were open. Of course they were open. She had opened them herself. Julian crossed the hall. His boots left mud on the marble. He stopped in the doorway, and there she was. Eleanor stood at the window where he had stood 2 weeks ago, in the exact spot, her back to the door, her riding coat still on, mud on the hem of her dress. Her hair was pinned up plainly. On the table beside her lay a single folded document. The contract. Close the doors, she said, without turning. You opened them. I opened them so the servants would see me walk in with my head up. She turned around. Her eyes were dry now, and clear, and steady as leveled iron. You may close them, for what comes next. What comes next belongs to no one but us. Julian closed the doors. The latch clicked. For a moment, neither of them moved. The clock on the mantel ticked. Once, twice, 3 times, 4. You went to my father's house, she said. Yes. To break the contract. To change it. His voice came out rougher than he intended. To put my own name in it. And then to ask you. Stop. She held up one hand. It did not tremble. You do not get to ask me anything yet. I rode here in the dark to say something, and I have been saying it in my head for 2 years, and you will stand there, and you will hear it. Julian stood there. Eleanor picked up the contract from the table. She held it flat on her 2 open palms, like something dead she was presenting for burial. 12 years ago, my father signed my life onto this paper. I was 14. Nobody asked me. She took 1 step toward him. 2 weeks ago, you stood in this room and traded me to your brother in front of your servants. Nobody asked me then, either. Your brother stood on a bridge and poured out 12 years of his heart, and even that kindness, was one more man deciding what my life should hold. Another step. Her voice never rose. That was the terrible power of it. And this morning I woke, and I learned that you were writing to my father to rearrange my future again. 2 Duke's sons, and 2 old men, all trading my name back and forth like a bill of sale. So I got on a horse. She stopped an arm's length from him. And I came to the room where it broke, to do the only thing that has ever been mine to do. She tore the contract in half. The sound of it ripped through the silent library. She laid the 2 halves on the table, one beside the other, and smoothed them flat with her palm, almost gently. "There," she said, "no contract, no obligation, no families, no scandal clauses, no lawyers. Nothing binds me to this house anymore. Nothing binds you to me." Her chin lifted. "So now, Julian Ashworth, for the first time since I was 14 years old, I am standing in front of you as a free woman. And you are standing in front of me with nothing to gain and nothing to trade." Her voice dropped to almost a whisper. "Now ask me." Julian looked at her, at the mud on her hem from the dark ride, at the gray eyes that had corrected his Latin and never apologized, at the woman who walked around walls. He did not reach for pretty words. He had burned a floor's worth of paper, learning that he had none. He knelt, a duke, on the library floor, in riding mud, in front of the torn halves of his father's contract. "I refused you because you frightened me," he said. "You still frighten me. You will frighten me when I am 80, and I have understood, somewhere on a dark road this morning, that being frightened by you is the only thing I have ever wanted to feel for the rest of my life." His voice broke, and he let it break. "There is no contract now. There is no reason on any paper in England for you to say yes. Marry me anyway. Not the Duke, not the name. Me, the fool who latched the door." The clock ticked. Once, twice, 3 times, 4. "You should know," Eleanor said softly, "that I walked around that wall in the snow once, 2 miles. I do not knock on latched doors, and I do not forgive quickly, and I will correct your Latin at every dinner party until you are dead. I am relying on it." Something moved through her face then. The wall, the one she had carried since she was 14, since the snow, since the library, came down, not slowly, all at once, the way ice breaks on a river in spring. She sank down onto her knees in front of him, so they were level, eye to eye, Duke and free woman, on the floor where he had broken her. "Then yes," she said. His hands came up and framed her face, and hers gripped the front of his mud-streaked coat, and outside the closed doors, Mrs. Pemberton, who was absolutely not listening at the keyhole, spun around to the gathered servants, with both hands pressed over her mouth. At that same moment, hooves sounded on the drive. Edmund came through the front hall at a run, coat flying, and stopped dead at the library doors, just as they opened from within. His brother and Eleanor stood in the doorway, side by side, her hand resting in the crook of Julian's arm. On the table behind them lay the contract, torn clean in 2. Edmund looked at the paper, at her hand on his brother's arm, at her face. His breath went out of him slowly. Then he straightened his coat, crossed the hall, and did the hardest and finest thing of his life. He bowed to her. "Sister," he said. Eleanor's eyes shone. She let go of Julian's arm, stepped forward, and kissed Edmund once on the cheek, and whatever she whispered to him, no servant ever heard, though Mrs. Pemberton swore until her dying day that the young lord smiled through it. Outside, the mist burned off the east fields. In the stable yard, 3 exhausted horses steamed in the morning sun. And in the great hall of Ashworth Hall, a footman was already running for the chapel bell.